Hello, and welcome to the first edition of the Language Forgers podcast. My name is Harry.
And I'm Jonah, or kaentwo.
And yes, this is a podcast about language creating and all the topics associated with that, like world building. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about those two things, and what we do in terms of our conlanging world building, and anything else that within those two fields that catches our interest. So we're going to start by just giving a little bit of history about us and our experience with conlanging. When we started. So I'll let Jonah begin.
Okay, sure. So I probably started at around like age 11 or 12 when I was just very bored in summer, and because I had like a main interest in languages and different writing systems, and I started world building. So I just created like a con world, and then had the necessity to have a language. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I started when I was about 14, 15, maybe a little bit younger. Yeah, and sort of just inspired by Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. I'm sure a lot of people are. And then I did more reading and a bit more research. I discovered the methods that a lot of people use, like the historical method, which I'm sure we'll talk about at many points over the various episodes, and why it's a very useful tool for creating languages. And so I've been going for a number of years now, and I've made quite a few languages, of which a very small group I consider decent to any degree. And you and I have been talking with each other for about, over a year now, I'd say. And we decided that because we're two white people, we might as well record our thoughts and put it on the internet. And because the world building conlang community, it's not the largest in the world, and because it is so niche, it means that basically any media that is available about those things, basically a lot of people in the community will consume. And there's not too many podcasts about language creation. I think probably the main one is the Artifexian podcast, even though it is more just generally world building. And as much as I love Edgar and Bill, they're clearly not linguists. And they get stuff wrong quite a lot about. Not all the time, of course. They are intelligent people, but like you can tell, the conlanging is not their main focus. And I'm a world builder who conlanging is at the forefront of all my creative decisions. And I don't want to speak for Jonah, but I'm pretty sure it's one of your main priorities too.
Yeah, of course. It's all about the languages, and the con world kind of just develops around the languages.
Yeah, the same for me.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's basically all we have in terms of introductions. So we're going to sort of explain the general format that each of these podcasts are going to follow as we go along, as this is our first episode. And so now we're going to do if I remember correctly, the updates about our current projects in terms of world building and conlanging.
Yeah, of course. And then, like, one quick note about the frequency of the podcast is that we are going to probably record one episode per month, like roughly.
Yeah, that's what we're going to try
because
for.
we are pretty busy. But yeah, then the current conlang and conworld projects, of course. Do you want to begin, or should I begin?
Yeah, I can start. So I've been working on a language called Tanol now for since about October of last year, and I'm getting into the very very last parts of the main elements of the grammar of the language, certainly. So I've got I still need to make a couple more prepositions, and I'm going to slightly revise the case system because I've decided that I don't really like the phonesthetics of the case endings, and then I might also change around the number marking a little bit too. But after that, like, the main part of the grammar will be completely done, and then I'll just be generating vocabulary. So I've just been working on prepositions recently, and I will talk in a future episode about how much I hate making prepositions, because there's such an not necessarily prepositions, adpositions in general, but this language has prepositions because the adpositions go before the word, whatever. So yeah, that's basically everything. I've been quite busy because I've just got a new job, so I haven't had a lot of time for conlang, a lot of time for thinking about conlanging, which is something I spend It's the only thing I do more than conlanging is thinking about how much I'm actually going to conlang, and then I don't. It's very annoying. Anyway, yes, Jonah.
Yeah, my situation is similar. I'm also working, so yeah, I'm currently more into my other hobby like genealogy and family history, but I'm also doing like very little conlang stuff. So at the moment, I'm working on the personal and last names of a certain region in my con world, which was like influenced by kaentwo. So Kent was my main language, and that's one dialect of Kentwo that I'm currently working on. And yeah, that's basically it. And I have like a bunch of other conlangs that I'm probably going to redo in the future, but I haven't had the time yet. So
Yeah, so basically we haven't been doing very much recently, but I study linguistics and German at the University of York in England, not York University in Canada. They're different things, and yeah, so I am gonna. The year starts again soon. Hopefully, if I had to do a resit for one of my exams because I screwed up something. So hopefully, if I pass that, then I'll be starting the new uni year soon. So that'll also mean I'll be doing a lot of stuff. But hopefully, it'll also provide some inspiration because studying linguistics means that you talk about languages a lot and you get a lot of inspiration for languages. So yeah, I'm gonna start getting more into my language build creation soon. And now that I'm sort of coming to the end of Tanol, and I'm going to start making a new language, which I'll probably talk about some of the creative process of that in these update sections on the podcast.
all right, so then should we continue with like etymology and your Harry's
Yes, my
linguistics
linguistics corner,
corner? Or
excellent. For this edition, I'm going to talk about a feature that which is a morphophonological feature. So that is a morphological feature, so a grammatical feature that is influenced by phonology, or maybe I guess you could say for this one it's the other way around, a phonological thing that is influenced by morphology, and that is a Celtic consonant mutation. Initial consonant mutation specifically, which is something that is not entirely unique to the Celtic languages, but when somebody who says initial consonant mutation, if you know what it is, immediately you'll think Welsh and Irish and the other Celtic languages. It is a system that I first discovered when I was about 15 or so, 16. It was just before I started learning about the IPA, and then when I taught myself the International Phonetic Alphabet, I sort of I learned what it actually was. And then I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I've been trying to implement it into a language for ages. It's just it took me quite a while to find a system that I was happy with. I made several test languages with different variations because I wanted something that was recognizably Celtic, like it wasn't entirely new, but it wasn't completely derivative, and it took me a long time to sort of get that balance. And I eventually found it, and then Tanol came out of that. So essentially, initial consonant mutation into Celtic languages specifically is a change to the, as you might guess, the initial consonant of a word due to certain grammatical environments. So it is in the Celtic languages, but interestingly, it actually evolved separately in the two branches of the Celtic language family, the one that Welsh belongs to and the one that Irish belongs to, which is why, while both Welsh and Irish have consonant mutation, they don't exactly work in the same way. So I'll talk about Irish first. So Irish has two kinds of mutation. It has the shevu, which is a kind of lenition, so a softening of sounds. So normally this is where stops become fricatives. So pa becomes fa, ta becomes ha, ka becomes ch, etc. Now there are a couple of other things like sa and sha also become ha, and gya becomes ya, but mostly it's a case of stops becoming fricatives. So a classic example of this is this kind of mutation is triggered by on or un, which is the definite article. So if we have the word ban, which means woman, you can't say an ban. You have to say an van, and that means the woman. Or, for example, the word maher, which is mother, becomes an waher or vaher, depending on your dialect of Irish. And this is not only triggered by the definite article, but by numerous um, numerous grammatical words. For example, there is a vocative particle a, which also triggers shevu. So, for example, if you say if you want to say, woman, in sort of like, you're announcing the woman, you'd also say a van as opposed to a ban. And then after also certain prepositions, possessive pronouns. So, for example, tach, which is house, becomes do hach as opposed to do tach for your house, and numerous other things. Now, there is also the uru, which is in linguistics we call eclipsis. Now, this is where voiceless sounds become voiced, and voiceless stops become voiced, and voice stops become nasals. For example, pa becomes ba, kya becomes gya, ba becomes ma, etc. And this is triggered after plural possessive pronouns. For example, if you wanted to say a, which also means there, if you wanted to say there, for example, boat, you wouldn't say a bad, you would say a mad. And it also is triggered by certain other words, though not as many as the shevu. I think the shevu is the more common kind of mutation. So that's Irish. Now Welsh has 3 kinds of mutation as opposed to 2. So it has soft mutation, which in Welsh is called treiglad meddal. Treiglad being the Welsh word for mutation. Nasal mutation, which is treiglad true null, apologies to Welsh speakers, and also aspirate or spirant mutation, which is called treiglad llais. So soft mutation is a sort of a combination of the uru and the shevu in Irish. So voiceless stops become voiced, but voiced stops become fricatives. So, for example, draig is the Welsh word for dragon, but its soft mutated form is ddraig with a the from the duh. Also, since things happen to approximants, so lla becomes la and ra becomes ra. So llan, which means like a parish, becomes lan, and rhywbeth, rhywbeth, which means something, becomes rhywbeth. Rhywbeth. I always struggle with the th at the end there. Then there's also nasal mutation, which is similar to the nasal effects of the uru, except it affects voiceless stops as well. So, for example, plant, which means children, becomes mlant with a voiceless bilabial nasal. And finally, aspirate mutation only affects voiceless stops, and it's where they become fricative. So, plant, children, becomes flant. Tref, which means town, becomes thrave. And, for example, coeden, which means tree, becomes choeden. And each of these mutations is triggered under different environments and can be affected also by the gender of a word too. So you might be asking yourself, how did this system evolve? Because it's clearly very extensive. It affects it affects nouns primarily, but I believe it can also affect verbs, especially in Welsh, because Welsh has extensive use of verbal nouns. So, and this system, while it is old, it's not ancient. It doesn't go all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. It doesn't even go all the way back to Proto-Celtic, really. So this system came about essentially as a result of sound changes going across word boundaries, which is something that is extraordinarily rare. Normally, sound changes are word internal. You have the word kada, and maybe kada, the duh becomes the in between vowels. So you would have kada, and then that's your sound change. Like, normally if you have the word kada and then the next word beginning with D as well, I don't know, kada des doesn't become kada des. But apparently, with these Celtic languages, that is exactly what happened. These sound changes that happened word internally then happened across words as well, which is presumably why this kind of mutation, these initial mutations are so rare, because this normally doesn't happen. If, the preceding word becomes a prefix, then yes, that's when these sort of intervocalic changes can then happen. So essentially what we're looking at here is these words, these prepositions or articles or possessive pronouns, speakers began to see them as a kind of pseudo prefix, and that's why the sound changes then happened across words. And so when I wanted to replicate this, or not necessarily replicate, but use this as a basis for the initial consonant mutation in my language, Tanol, I had to sort of think about, what kind of sound changes can happen across words. So, there is some lenition, but there's also palatalization, and words that sounds that de-Africatize, whatever, they stop being affricates. And then there's also another change which is determined by h and ch affecting the sound that begins the next word. So it is recognizably Celtic in my opinion, but it is not exactly the same as Irish or exactly the same as Welsh or any of the other Celtic languages. I just use Irish and Welsh because there's been more written about them than, for example, Breton or Manx. And also I know more Welsh and Irish than Breton or Manx or Scottish Gaelic or whatever. So yes, that's Harry's Linguistic Corner. Initial consonant mutation. It's really cool and extremely rare. So if you're going to put it in your conlangs, maybe you only put it in one or two, because there's only a handful of languages on Earth where it happens. So yeah, any questions, Jonah?
Not really a question, but
Yeah.
like a anecdote, because I once talked with a linguistics professor who had like a weird theory that Semitic or Afro-Asiatic navigators or like seafarers kind of came to Northern Europe and influenced Celtic the way that they had like these consonant mutations, or like all the stuff that is so different in Celtic was explained by him that through influence by some Semitic speaking seafarers,
Yeah,
which is
I was
kind of funny.
I am actually
But yeah.
aware of that theory. A place where it's particularly interesting is in inflected prepositions. So both Welsh and Irish in the Celtic languages, and also the Semitic languages, so Hebrew and Arabic, have exactly the same system, where you can't say, for example, in me or on you or anything like that in these languages, in the Semitic languages or the Celtic languages. What you do is you have a stem of the preposition and you inflect it with a person. So then in me becomes all one word. So imagine in English, if we did this, instead of saying in me, we had maybe a stem for in, which is I. And then to say in me, you would actually say imi. And then to say in you, you would maybe just say you or something like this. And then you would have this for every single preposition in the language. And German actually does this to a certain extent as well. For example, in German, you can't really say auf es, you would say darauf. And you can't really say in es, you would say darin or drin.
Yeah, absolutely. We have like a bunch of funny or interesting propositions, but it's just an interesting evolution, because German often kind of combines different particles.
Yes, so instead of saying in
as
Dane, you say in.
Yeah.
So saying in s, you say darin. Imagine that, but for every single preposition in the line, and not just for every preposition, because that's really what German does, but for every person as well. Because in German you only do it for it. You can't really say da sie for, well, that wouldn't make sense at all. It sie in for in her. It doesn't really work. But like, imagine if it did. This is what this system of inflected prepositions is like. And it's other than sort of like this case in German, I don't think it's in any other Indo-European language. and I'm not sure how widespread inflected prepositions are in Afroasiatic languages in general, but the fact that it's in the Semitic languages and the Celtic languages, and it's basically exactly the same system, and yet these languages are not related to each other, is kind of funny. So I can certainly see why this linguist believed that there must be some sort of connection between the Celtic languages and the Semitic languages. There are other examples. It's just the inflected preposition thing really struck me as interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of a wild theory, but after all, there's another theory that there were like Phoenicians that fled after the Punic War and kind of collaborated with the Celtic population in Spain, and then went to Southern America or South America, which is also interesting. I mean, there could be some kind of influence because, after all, Phoenicians had settlements in Spain.
Oh yeah, they were good travelers, the Phoenicians. Actually, talking about crazy theories, I was reading a bit because every flipping historical linguist and their mum has a theory about the origin of Basque and where Basque comes from. And
yeah,
I mean, there are a couple of theories. I mean, there are some that are really out there, like Basque is the language or the leftover language of Atlantis, and that when Atlantis was destroyed, the people fled to northern Spain and became the Basque people, which is a theory certainly. I've heard other theories that so the Vasconic theory. That sort of like relates them to pre-Indo-European people, and it's clear that they must be pre-Indo-European. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, after all, there's a bunch of substrate languages, and in my opinion, it would be possible that Basque was just a leftover. I mean, after all, there were a lot of substrate words in early Greek.
A lot of substrate words, a lot, and also substrate words in the Germanic languages as well. Plenty of substrate words.
Yeah.
Now, my favorite theory that I've heard, and in my opinion, a really plausible one, is that Basque is related to the Caucasian languages, the North Caucasian languages specifically, so Georgian.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that as well, but it kind of makes sense because, I mean, it's kind of a no-go to equate the speaking population or the language family and this family of the speaking population. But after all, there were like Indo-Europeans who had some kind of DNA part from northern Caucasian farmers or like shepherds. So I think like 25% or something like that. So there must have been some kind of connection, and I'm pretty sure there's probably some kind of connection to the early Europeans or the pre-Indo-European population,
pre-Indo-European, you mean?
As well. So that's definitely possible.
So but something that I found really interesting. So obviously there are certain things grammatically that stick out, like there are no other ergative languages in Europe other than Basque and the North Caucasian languages. Like, obviously, pretty much all other European languages are Indo-European or Uralic, and there aren't really any ergative cases in those languages apart from northern India and then part of Indo-European languages. But like the fact that they're both ergative and both use a similar kind of split ergativity is kind of interesting. Also, they both have really complicated verb systems. But if you look at it lexically, because that's where a lot of evidence tends to come from, is that if you can prove things with regular sound changes. So in sort of like in Georgian and Basque, if you compare basic agricultural words, there are a lot of very, very similar roots. But, and here's the interesting things, their words for metals are completely different. These are pre-metal societies when if these languages were related, when these people were one group. This is clearly a purely agrarian, zero or like very little knowledge of metal working. So this puts us like very, very far back in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the possibility of like similar roots could also be through the influence of the possibility of like similar roots could also be through the influence of another culture that just spread out their knowledge. There were like when the agricultural people came to southeastern Europe, they just mixed in, of course, but the main population stayed similar to what they were before. So it's not like they completely overtook the whole population, but they kind of integrated into it. So, I mean, there were of course just possibilities of loan words, but sure. I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's clear that that there must have been some sort of relation between the Proto-Indo-European people and the Proto-Uralic people as well, because there are quite a few shared roots there as well, and clearly some words were shared.
Yeah,
Like, for example, the word like the root for water in Proto-Indo-European, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it was something like water. With the voiceless R at the end. I know it's got voiceless R at the end, like
yeah,
water or something like that. And then it's really quite similar in Proto-Uralic as well. And there are a couple of other words like me or me or something beginning with M being associated with the first person. I mean, the problem is here is that we're going so far back in the past here in terms of like comparative
yeah,
linguistics, where
yeah,
you're
absolutely.
looking at the fact that the first person is associated with the bilabial nasal ma. Like if you're going to have like clearly you're not going to be able to prove regular sound
Yeah,
changes, and you sort of it's a lot more guesswork because obviously the whole reason why we can prove to whatever extent you can prove anything in science, you can prove the existence of Proto-Indo-European is that like there are too many coincidences here. Like it's clear that there is some kind of relation, and that we can prove. Grimm's law. I don't want to say one of the most famous laws in linguistics because outside of linguistics nobody's heard of it. But the fact that stops become fricatives in certain environments, and for example, Romance languages to Germanic languages is you can see it all the time. Pater in Latin versus father in English, or Vater in German. Bruder in German, or brother in English, being frater in Latin, and then you also have like fa becoming ha and then being lost in Spanish. It means you get hermanos, sorry. So you can see relationships here, across the various Indo-European languages. But like you're not going to see a similar thing between you're not going to see a similar thing between
absolutely.
English and Finnish, for example, because if there is a relationship between English and Finnish, it is clearly so ancient that it's going to be impossible to tell what are cognates and what are just chances, and where are the words that their meanings have shifted so much we can't associate them anymore, and the sounds have shifted too much. It's just impossible to tell. So yeah.
Yeah, and then there's also the possibility of like just contact between the languages.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, if there's like a long contact, they of course also share similar words.
So that's the thing that killed the Altaic theory. It's just like this is clearly just language contact. Like if these languages are related, then it's much further back than you think it is.
Yeah. Okay, should we continue with my etymology part?
Yes, in the same vein, let's talk about etymology.
Yeah, so my word of the day is kind of random, maybe. My problem is that whenever I'm just seeing anything, I'm wondering about like the origins of the word. So a few days or weeks ago, I had spinach and wondered about the name of spinach. And I'm going to talk about spinach now. So spinach in English and Spinat in German, for example, are kind of hard to tell just by the look of the words where they're from. Sometimes you can see words that are probably from French or probably from Latin, but in this case, it's kind of difficult. So when we trace back spinach, we can see the influence from Anglo-Norman, spinache. Then we have Old French, espinache, and this comes from Old Occitan, espinarque. And Old Occitan is from a region where there was influence of Arabic. So Arabic has isfanach, meaning spinach as well. And Arabic had this word from Middle Iranian, ispanag or ispanach.
There's
And
variation.
there's like,
Mhm.
yeah, different, dialectal ones. And then there's a reconstruction of Old Iranian spinaka. Yeah, that is actually from Proto-Indo-European spe, meaning thorn-like or like a stick or a sharp point. And there's actually other cognates or like words that are akin. So we have, for example, spine, which is from Latin. Actually, I read that people used to think that through folk etymology, spinach was from spine because of the correlation of strength and spinach. They thought maybe it's from spine.
I think we can forgive these people a bit as well, is that like because in Middle English, spine was pronounced speen, so we're looking at speen and spinach. You can see then definitely how these people might equate the two words as being. I mean, they are related, but not in the way that these people thought. But yeah, that is kind of cool that they're like, oh, spine, the spine and
Yeah.
spinach, they're basically the same thing. They sound similar.
Yeah, so spinach is kind of or the type of word that spinach is a Kulturwort. I'm using the original German pronunciation. So basically a word of that can be found in various languages in different geographical regions.
Yeah, it was so the word was spread with the thing itself. So another example of this, I believe, is the word cat. It's very similar in lots of words, and sort of. But I think another word that uses it is a Vanderwort.
Yeah, Wanderwort.
I'm not sure if those are those are different concepts, but yeah, but they're similar things. So like for example, cat. If you look at across European languages, the word is always pretty similar. So we have obviously we have Katze in German, Kath in Welsh,
Yeah,
Cactus in Latin, and that gave birth to chat in French, and also Gato, gata, the only thing that's changed there is the k has become voiced at the beginning, so we get g instead. Like all these words are clearly related to each other and all come back to the Latin catus, but we don't really know where that word came from itself.
yeah. I mean, there's like
And some people have even related it back, talking about what we were doing earlier, Proto-Uralic, cadwa, which meant a female furry animal.
oh, interesting. Oh yeah, and another Kulturwort that I'm thinking of is lapis lazuli, or I don't know.
Lapis lazuli, I would say.
For example, lapis means just stone, and lazuli is the same as azur in Spanish.
It means blue, right?
Yeah,
Blue stone.
yeah, but it's from a certain region in like in Persia as well. So back then, they exported it from there. So of course they took the word.
Yeah.
And what's also interesting is the zul is the same root as yellow, yel. So basically like shining, becoming yellow, shining becoming blue.
Yeah.
So that's also
And
pretty interesting.
as a linguist, I always find these words where we're not quite sure of the etymology fascinating, because it's clear there are just some languages which have died and left no trace at all. Like we have no written records, nobody wrote about them, but yet they still have an influence on the vocabulary of our words today. But as a conlanger, I find it infuriating because I want to make a word for cat. I'm just going to see where the word cat comes from in real world languages, so I can get some inspiration to make my word cat. And then I look, and like every language I see, it's like the etymology is unknown. I'm like, God damn it! Throw me a bone here, Wiktionary.
Yeah, same. When I started, when I wanted to make like the word for cat in one of my languages, I just couldn't find any possible etymology, and I was like, screw it, I'm just going to use like a chunk as the root because like chunky and the typical cat meme.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is as well is that like quite a lot of in terms of like the name for an animal, a good sort of bet to have sort of like as a name that is sort of a realistic etymology is literally the sound that the animal makes. Onomatopoeia is very common for the word for an animal. So, for example, the word for cat in Chinese is mao. In Proto-Turkic, which is the language that Tanol derives from, the word is nese. because you can sort of see, nese, nese is sort of another sound that a cat could realistically make. So that became neza in Tamil. So the Tamil word for cat is just neza. And that's not. I know in English, not sorry in English, but cross linguistically, the word for crow usually has the syllable ka in it, or at least the sound ka, because that's the sound a crow makes. Ka ka ka. So quite a lot of languages have their word for this animal based around this sound. And of course, like for other animals, it might not be the case. It might be, description of their size, or if it's a domesticated animal, you might name it based on what it's for. You could easily, call a cow a milk animal because that's probably what you're going to be using a cow for.
Yeah, but I also love like the types of animal names that are just like kind of like a taboo name, like the
Yeah.
Miet Viet in Russian,
Hmm.
or Bear, like the brown one, because there was some cultural
Hmm.
significance to the animal and some taboo to the animal and stuff like that. This is so interesting and so cool to replicate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, also, it's quite reasonable to say that these ancient people just had a word meaning that animal. Like if there were worms, they could call them, the thing that crawls through the ground, or they could just, I don't know, say like Ngemoch, and that means worm. Or I mean, I was talking about sort of like what the animal is used for. So the words for horse in Tanol comes from kona, which means to drive or to control, with otsa, meaning a non-human agent. So the thing that drives, essentially, which maybe might make a super amount of sense, but you can sort of see these people, they mostly use horses for riding, and so they drive them. So yeah, animals and etymology is an interesting too. Plants as well, because obviously a big element of plant names is the color of the plant. We have so many plants associated with their color. A viola, for example, is associated with blue. Lily. Yeah, we should move on to the main topic.
Latin and the usage of quote unquote Latin in Harry Potter and the magic spells of Harry Potter.
Yes. Now this is something that it's something that I have thought about a lot for quite a long time as well. Obviously, I reread the Harry Potter books last year and sort of started thinking about the spells. There was one line in the third book where I think Ron mentioned something about ancient Egyptian wizards. I was like, hold on, what language would they use? And then sort of like everything came from that. But then I was also specifically a video from Luke Ranieri of Polymathy, where he talks about like the actual like what the Latin itself means or what the Latin itself doesn't mean, because some of it is just made up words and it's not real Latin. Like that sort of threw me off as well. And then there's also the whole thing of pronunciation. So to sort of like sum up my thoughts, essentially, or sort of like sum up the situation, so to speak. A lot of the spells in Harry Potter are based on Latin. Sometimes they are Latin, but it doesn't really make sense to use those words, or sometimes they're modified versions of Latin. So for example, if you take the spell Lumos, and now Lumos, that was or Lumos, that was not a Latin word. And there was an adjective, luminosus, which meant luminous, and so you could see, maybe it's a contraction of that, but lumos was not a real word in Latin. Also, if you also get stuff like just stuff that's been made up, like I think I'm not sure if it's in the second book, but it's definitely in the second film. Alate ascendere, which is alate is not only not like it's not it doesn't make any sense because it's not a real word in Latin. Like it doesn't mean anything. I can't even tell what it's supposed to be. And like also ascendere would obviously that's not right. The infinitive form of that verb ascendere is ascendere, not ascendare. So yeah, and it would mean escandare was used as an alternative form of the subjunctive, so it'd be like may whatever the hell alate means ascend. or like make it ascend, but like yeah, it doesn't really work. Or sort of like you have similar ones. I believe in the same scene where Snape says "Vipera evanesca," which is supposed to be "Vipera evanescat," which would mean may the viper disappear. But like he says, obviously all the pronunciation is wrong, and it doesn't have the final T that would make it make sense in terms of the verbal conjugation. So there's all sorts of the grammatical stuff. And also, like, the pronunciation, not only is it not actual Latin pronunciation, like, some of the stress is wrong. So, well, the first spells that we hear is in the anglicized Latin is oculus reparo. With reparo, the stress is on the second syllable. But stress in Latin, people think it's a lot more complicated than it actually was, but it's not really. It was based on the penultimate stress rule, which is the stress falls on the second to last syllable of a word if that syllable is closed or long. Otherwise, it goes on the antepenultimate syllable. Now, in reparo, the second syllable does not have a long vowel and it's not closed, so it should go on the first syllable. Reparo. But yeah, apparently 11-year-old Emma Watson didn't know about the penultimate stress rule. How dare she? And yeah, screwed up pronunciation. But then also pronunciation in general is sort of really weird, because it's like, okay, yeah, we have, Hermione's going to attack Ron for pronouncing Leviosa wrong, but it's like Leviosa in terms of actual Latin is already like it would be Leviosa or Leviosa. Is she correcting him for being wrong about the anglicized version of Latin pronunciation? Okay, so does every wizard have to use anglicized Latin pronunciation, or can they use their own version of Latin? And so, how does the magic know? Because obviously, you would have to pronounce the spell right in some way, otherwise Hermione wouldn't be correcting Ron's pronunciation. But so does the magic know? All right, if you're French, you're allowed to say, instead of saying reparo, you're allowed to say reparo, and have the stress on the last syllable and replace the r or the r with a r. Or like, what if your language doesn't have L? What are they supposed to do? Because then they would say like lumos, rumosu, because they don't like having a final S either in Japanese. So you've gone from like luminosus, the actual Latin word, to lumos in English. But then in like something like Japanese, it would be like rumosu or something like that. So immediately, like, well, how the whole thing starts to just break down. The other thing about Latin is that Latin was a real language. Latin had real native speakers. 2,000 years ago, there were people who'd go around to the shops and they would say "Salve, amicus," amice, and just they would talk. Yeah, they would talk in Latin. They would say, "Yeah, como te habes." Waleo, waleo, just stuff like this. They would talk in Latin. Latin was a real language. It wasn't, just used for scientific papers and religious documents. And so when Ron talks about the ancient Egyptian wizards, ancient Egypt was concurrent to Proto-Indo-European pretty much. It's 6,000 years old, a lot of it. Like, Latin wouldn't have been a language. Like, Latin was only a language, 2,500 years ago, really. Anything before that, they couldn't have spoken Latin because Latin would not have existed back then. It's sort of like the thing, where English media, like, the Romans have British accents. Well, if they're going to speak with any accents, like surely an Italian accent would make the most amount of sense there. Why do they speak with a British accent?
I mean, after all, yeah, it's just not possible, especially when there's like so many other wizards and witches in Southern America or Southeast Asia, where they wouldn't even have contact to Latin, or they wouldn't even have the importance of Latin in their culture. What did they? Which language did they use before the conquest? And
yeah, exactly. Okay, were there Mayan wizards? Because obviously in the New World, like nobody was aware of Latin as a concept until the conquistadors came over. So did the Mayans use like the prestige language of their area, or did they just know about Latin? And again, did they have to use anglicized Latin pronunciation, or could they use Mayanized Latin pronunciation?
oh, I have an idea. So maybe they could just disappear.
Separate.
Yeah, so they could just do that and just go from London to, I don't know, Mexico City.
Whatever Mexico City would have been at that time. I mean, it's true. I mean, but like, there's another one there, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
apparate in English. Like I'm not sure what that's supposed to be, but like so there is in Latin appareo. That's what it is. Appareo, which means I appear or I am visible or to become to come into sight. And that eventually that comes from ad towards and pareo be visible. So to come towards visibility.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the name would have been Tenochtitlan. I knew it, but I forgot it. Yeah.
Well, that would have been mine. That would have been that's Nahuatl. So even still, like the Aztecs would have had exactly the same problem. And I would love to hear Latin in a Nahuatl accent. That'd be very entertaining to hear. I think it has z allophonically, but other than that, I think that's maybe it. Also, Nahuatl doesn't have oo. So that's already an interesting restriction there. Anyway, so appareo becomes apparate. So essentially, they're taking a Latin word and giving it an English verb suffix. And then obviously, you said the German translation of that word, apparieren, where it has the German infinitive suffix for like Latinate words, or obviously or a lot of loan words. I could turn to record into a German word by saying, I don't know, rekorrieren or something like that.
Rekordieren.
Even in the translations, they're sort of changing the Latin to sort of work with the native language. And sort of to hear a bit more about like the actual like Latin itself and what the spells like literally mean, if indeed they mean anything, I would definitely check out Polymathy's video, Harry Potter Latin in Magic Spells. And so something I think we should talk about a little bit is what would we do differently?
Yeah.
Like, how would we make a magical language? Because clearly this has got a lot of world building issues and also just issues in terms of the fact that, as I said, Latin was a real language. There was nothing really that special about it other than what we've assigned to it culturally. And outside of Europe, it's just seen as another ancient language. Like, we don't really see Sanskrit or Akkadian or classical Arabic with any sort of reverence, but for many people, those languages are incredibly important to them culturally. So, what would we do differently?
Yeah, I mean, there's some. I mean, even Hebrew or like Babylonian would have been interesting to use because Hebrew is like the language that is seen as most occult and used for magic in like the secret, like John Dee and.
Yeah.
So I mean that would have been another possible candidate, but after all, my attempt would have been just to use the most religious and most prestigious language of each area and each culture,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, as we said, so I don't know, this could have been Gothic maybe in like some regions, or Old Church Slavonic, depending on when the magic history like started. I mean, it would have been there for even longer than just 2 or 3 or 4,000 years. I mean, it would have been there for like the.
So what you're talking about is different magical languages.
Yeah, it's one possibility.
Depending on region. I mean, it would certainly fix some problems with pronunciation. Is that you're not going to try and force Japanese people to try and speak Latin or anglicize Latin. It means you would get something a bit closer to them.
Yeah, for example, let's say in China they would have maybe used the oracle bone script of the time and used that later, or like a derivation of that. But then again, I mean, the magic would have been way older than these languages too. So I don't know. Maybe there's like a whole entire new, even older language that all magic speakers speak. That they have contact in between, or like in the time where they hadn't discovered like the actual regions. So I mean, they are humans, but they are of course also like they have magic powers. But do the individual communities of witches and wizards did they have contact? So this would be an important question to talk about before deciding which language to use for spells.
Mm. I mean, so yeah, for me, I would go away from natural languages entirely, which means maybe it's harder for people to associate because obviously there is a certain association with, in European culture at least, with Latin and the occult, to some extent, and that's why Latin is usually used with magic spells, or associated with magic spells. And you get phrases like abracadabra, which is ultimately derived from nonsense Latin. But I would go away from that entirely and make something new, because for me, in terms of the actual internal world logic for the wizarding world, it would make a lot more sense. Now, originally, what I thought is that there would just be this one magical language, but the thing is that you mentioned once about the fact that the wizards don't even have to say the spell.
Yeah, for example, Dumbledore. Dumbledore is one of the most powerful ones, and he doesn't even have to say it. So, I mean, do they just have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
think about it?
Yeah. There's a word for it, I believe. I think it's maybe in the fifth or the sixth book. There's sort of like casting without words, but I can't remember what it's called. What they call it? It's sort of like a skill that I'll see if I can Google it quickly. Hold on. Casting without words. Harry Potter. So yeah, so what this means is that, like the Latinate kinds of words, non-verbal. That's what it's called. These non-verbal spells sort of like are just like, do they say the Latin in their head? Presumably not, because while yeah, you can have an internal monologue when when you raise your arm, your brain doesn't go, "I am raising my arm now." It's just something that you do. So is it like that? Is it almost like a muscle that you have? In which case, the Latin would just be like um, an expression of this kind of muscle memory, so to speak.
But then again, how could you then? There were so many mentions of spells gone wrong. So the one where like
Yeah,
someone was crushed by a rhinoceros or something like that. Then we have like what was his name again? Like the Irish dude who always
yeah. I can't remember what it's called now, but I know what you're talking about. Oh, Seamus.
Seamus, yeah,
Yeah, Seamus
Seamus Finnegan.
Finicky.
He
Finnegan, whatever, yeah, because JK Rowling's very good with names. He's an Irish character, Seamus.
Yeah, I mean he
Ugh.
did a lot of explosions because he had spells. Wait, he's an Irish character doing explosions. Wow.
Yeah, oh, yeah. And she wrote it in the 90s.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
dear.
Yeah. No, I meant so basically when there's like a spell gone wrong, there's so many there's so many things that can happen. But I mean, if you know what you want to do, then again, you presumably need to remember the actual spell. But maybe that's of course as well because they're like teenagers, and they have to study magic first. So I don't know.
So something that I would do, and this is basically the magic system or the draft of the magic system that I have in my novels or my in my world building project, because there is a certain degree of magic, is that there are certain individuals like in Harry Potter who are inherently magical. A Muggle can't say Avada Kedavra and it work because it just doesn't. You have to have a
You need the wand.
yeah, you need the wand, yeah, whatever. But like, even if you give a muddle a wand and say Wingardium Leviosa, they won't be able to pick you up. It just won't work. So you have to have a certain predilection for magic. You have to have something within you which inherently allows you to use magic. So what I would assume is that like in certain cultures, ancient cultures around the world, there are these people would discover that if they do certain things, if they think certain things, or if they have, these conductors, wands, if you like, that allow them to use their magic fully, they would realize it would be a lot easier to do these spells if they didn't have to, create a mental image of what they wanted the result to be. They can just, write it down in a word or in a phrase and then use that word. But then obviously this would happen independently across the world. You would get, I don't know, maybe ancient wizards in Anatolia, and they have their own system, and this is based on their Anatolian language. But then equally, you have Mayan wizards who use Mayan as their basis for their magical language, and then you have Chinese speakers who use Chinese as their basis for their magical language, and maybe maybe ancient Viking wizards as well who use Old Norse, and then that means you would get lots and lots of different, and these would all be conlangs, but they would still be based on the real world. So maybe, to use, I don't know, Old Norse as an example, I believe the Old Norse word for fire was something like fair or fear, something like that. Correct me. I'll do a correction at some point if I can be bothered in the next episode. But like maybe like all spells for fire are based around that, and maybe like to make fire come out you want, you can say throw fire, and those two words, maybe over time these get compressed down due to sound changes and the fact that people use these words a lot, and then you would get throw fire gets crushed down into one word, and then that one word then just becomes the word for to cast fire, and it's still all based around real languages. It's just a bit more conlang based, which I think really the route that JK should have taken if she wanted a more realistic book about school for wizards in Scotland.
I mean, we don't want to totally hate on Harry Potter. I mean, I
No,
was
no.
a huge fan, and I'm definitely still interested, but not as interested as like a few years back. I actually have like 13 wands in my collection or something like that. I spent multiple €100 on stuff like that. So I wouldn't be the one to hate on Harry Potter. But after my rather Potterhead phase, I'm just criticizing a few aspects that are worthy of criticism. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and don't I'm not like as into Harry Potter as a lot of other people are. Like, I think it's a fine series. I certainly think certain elements of it haven't particularly aged well, especially character names. And also JK Rowling she is a person who keeps on talking about her opinions, and that's as much as I'm going to say about her on this podcast. But yeah, but this is the criticism, sort of like the linguistic aspect of your world is a criticism that I have for a lot of fantasy, even fantasy that I am a big fan of, like Brandon Sanderson's books. Like the Mistborn series. I absolutely love that series, but Brandon Sanderson does certain things linguistically where I'm like, I mean, like clearly these people are not conlangers, and conlanging isn't the main part of their world building. If
Yeah,
you know,
but that's why we have like conlangers.
yeah,
We have
yeah,
conlangers that you can just pay to. You can also pay us to create a
yeah, yeah,
conlang for
but
your world. No, but
but like but what I'm saying is like if Mistborn had more realistic nomenclature in terms of character names and things and places, would it be a better book series? No, probably not. It would still be as good as it is. It's a little criticism that I have because it's my field, and so you read enough stuff and you're like, well, you use the sound th a lot, and th is really rare, or like how these different languages actually work with each other, or if you get stuff like Game of Thrones, it's like, okay, so why are there some names that are real world names, John, Sam, Ned, Rob, but then you have other names which are not, like Cersei or
yeah, I mean the problem with that is probably that the author started making those, and I gotta say I'm also writing on a novel, or like writing a novel. There's one character called Nick, and it's just not. It's like English and not kaentwo at all. But my excuse was that he's actually from England and kind of
well,
accidentally came into this world. But I had to change some names. After all, so I mean, I understand that he might have wanted to keep his names.
well, I think the other thing is that like so like obviously because Robert has its own etymology within our world, which means that presumably, unless it's complete coincidence, we would have to have a similar etymology in that world as well, which like things start to break down. But I think the reason is that like if you have an entire novel made up of made up names, it becomes even more difficult to remember character names. And that's one of the things that a lot of people say with Game of Thrones, is that there are too many characters, there's too many weird names. So imagine, like, even if, like, basic names like Catelyn, Robb, Ned, if these names change, names along the lines of Tyrion. And then you also have the thing with spelling, like, okay, so how is a Y pronounced in Westeros? In the Westeros language, is it sort of like, did it used to be U as well, like it did for English, and then it unrounded to E, and then there were like shifts there, and then depending on stress, it also became I, because there was a great vowel shift, and then we just start getting into the whole thing of like, this is the problem with using English as your language for your con world, is that what it does is it presumes that English also exists in your con world, and then all the things that happen to English in our world also happen to English in your con world, which means also Latin would have to exist in your con world, and Greek and French, and it just starts to break down.
Of course, but I mean, that I actually created some languages for clients, and they're often English, and so it's not what I would do, but you're often doing or creating a language that is, at least from spelling and phonology, kind of similar to English, with maybe like a few spicy twists. You kind of want to create something that is easily pronounceable for like English readers, because that's the majority, and English is like the world language and whatnot. So that's what many people do with the languages for like stuff like that. That's definitely not what I would do for my own stuff, but I also noticed myself kind of coming closer to an kind of Englishy pronunciation, not the R or something like that, but it's just very hard to explain how to pronounce it then. So, I mean, if I'm just having like a normal rolled R, it's already hard to describe to people who are not into languages.
And yeah, so that's really the thing, is sort of like the conlang community is quite a lot of us are also very much into fantasy and fantasy media. The media in general doesn't really target conlangers. It sort of targets the fantasy audience, who are quite a lot of the time English speakers. And so it means that these people who are writing the books are as knowledgeable of linguistics as the people they're writing for. So the majority of the audience does not care that using Latin for spells really doesn't make very much sense. The fact that it's kind of weird how there are both real world names and made up in Game of Thrones, and how the spelling with those words, like Tyrion is spelled with a Y and it's Tywin, but the Y is pronounced differently in both of them. So it's sort of like, it's like we are some of the only people who care about this, and like it doesn't affect my enjoyment at all. I absolutely love Game of Thrones. I love Mistborn. I'm fine with Harry Potter.
And DGP is also very, very, very savvy of his field. So
but the books is because DJP David J. Peterson, he was not involved in the languages of the books. He only came in with the TV show. So like, when Martin was writing it, he was not thinking about the linguistic context of these names. It really did not matter to him. He just wanted to make names that sound cool, and he did. And he wanted to make a really cool story, and he did. Do the linguistics make sense? Not really. Does that mean that I now hate Game of Thrones? Absolutely not. I love Game of Thrones. I love A Song of Ice and Fire. I think great series, great books. The fact that the linguistics don't really make sense in the books really doesn't bother me at all. And same thing with the reason I don't really like Harry Potter that much is not because the Latin doesn't really make very much sense. It's because there are certain things in the writing style and the plotting that doesn't really sit well with me, or like I don't really enjoy as much as a writer. It's just sort of like a fun thing to have a discussion about, and what we would do differently.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the whole topic of why it's important to have like a real conlang for a show or like a book. I actually wrote an article about that. I've sent you the article like a few months ago, and it's. I mean, we don't have to talk about it in detail, but basically my thing was, or my main point was that it's important to have it for like natural reasons. So you wanted to have it the most natural world as possible, and then as well, if there's like conlangs, for example, in Dune or anything like that, it's kind of it's easily. I mean, they oftentimes use like a bunch of different real life languages to create a new language, and so after in times of globalization where everyone has or most people around the world have the possibility to watch or read your book, it's easier to for them to see if there's an author who uses your language for the language of evil, or like words from your language for the language of evil. Of course, you're maybe sad or
Annoyed, certainly.
annoyed, and that's definitely a point worth thinking about when you create a language, or if you start just
Yeah,
using some
it's like
basic words from another
yeah,
language. So especially like minorities.
yeah.
I mean, that's so disrespectful to just use their language for your stuff.
It's one of the few problems I have with J.R. Tolkien's languages is that for the dwarves, the greedy, money grabbing people, he used Hebrew as his basis for the language of Jewish people who throughout history in Europe have been stereotyped as being greedy moneylenders. So it's like that seems like too big of a coincidence to be an accident. So
I
it's
mean,
like,
and then again, there's also a point of criticism in Harry Potter with I forgot the English name, but those who work at the bank, Gringotts, how they are portrayed.
oh, the goblins, yeah,
Yeah, the goblins. It's a similar point. Yeah,
yeah, large hooks, yeah, hooked
yeah.
noses, all that sort of stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's clearly there's some Semitic or influence here in terms of the appearance, which is quite uncomfortable and in many ways. So yeah, it's sort of like that's why I always think you should use a conlang and like good conlang as well. It's not like so. For example, Dune. I've recently reread Dune, and I really enjoyed it because I reread it ready for the new film
Oh,
coming out, which we'll probably talk about when it comes out because it will have conlang stuff in it if we're to be believed. Because yeah, David J. Peterson's doing the languages for it, and as much as I love that book, and the fact that the language is clearly based on Arabic, but it's not Arabic. It's kind of weird because the whole thing with Dune, and not to go on like a massive tangent about Dune and the universe of Dune, is that there are no aliens in Dune. Every single creature, intelligent creature in Dune, is just a human. But humans have been out in the stars for so long that we have evolved slightly to match whatever planet we're on. And so the question becomes like, what language do all these people speak in? Do they have like real? Well, they can't have translators because there's no technology really. Like the whole point of Dune is that like there was a thing in the past called the Butlerian Jihad where all thinking machines were destroyed. A translation, something like the Universal Translator in Star Trek would fall under that description. So like. Are there like a group of languages on Kaladin, which is where the Atreides family come from? So, because clearly the Fremen have their own language, and that's a trope that I really hate. That like one people or one planet have one language, like no.
and they're like the desert people who, by coincidence, speak a Arabic-ish language.
Yeah, like the Lisan al Gaib. It's like yeah, that's
I mean, we probably could go into more and more detail, but maybe it's like a topic for another episode to talk about. Yeah,
yeah. Better move on. Yeah. So we'll talk about the language, the conlang in June when more details been released about it. Because all we currently know is that David J. Peterson's we're making it, and David J. Peterson makes fantastic conlangs, and I always love analyzing his work. So that'll be a topic for a later date. But perhaps it's best to move on to Yona's world building challenge.
yeah. I'm doing a world building exercise or challenge in each episode where you can also participate in. So it's just to, I don't know, to get some skills or to get some creativity for your world building. Yeah, so I'm here with a world building challenge, which is to create a Kultur or Wanderwort in your language, based off of some language in your Cornwall that is not related to your conlang of focus. So basically, you're just going to create some kind of word. It could be a plant, could be a medicine, could be a food item or animal that was of importance to the speakers of language A, and then is somehow transferred to language B or language C or maybe even more languages. So that's what we're going to do today. And then there's an additional step, namely creating a family name in relation to the object. So if you're going to have a word about an animal, maybe there's a last name of someone who, I don't know, who sells the animal or who kills the animal or who cooks the animal. So you understand what I mean?
Yeah. So you could have someone whose name literally means like I don't know, cattle trader. Obviously, like in Middle Eastern culture, the camel is an incredibly important symbol of wealth. For example, as one who has a lot of camels, could be a surname for a very very rich family, or just like people who are rich, sort of have that sort of like an honorary title. A camel owner.
Yeah.
Or like many camel owners, or something like that. Yeah, so I know what you're talking about. So now we normally we would do this during the recording, but we've actually pre-prepared our example here of our Wander or Kulturwörter. I did the plural in German. There.
Yeah.
That was interesting. So do you want to talk about the words that you had first, or do you want to should I go first with my one?
It would be great if you could start. I don't know. I mean, I can start as well.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Sure, yeah, I can start. Yeah, so I decided that I wasn't going to use my actual my con world and my own conlangs, because I just wanted to start with a completely fresh basis. So some of these conlangs that I've like made one word in, so I can't really call them full conlangs, but these very simple langs are based roughly on some of my conlangs. But essentially, the story of my Van der Voort starts with the language Proto-Sawa, which is the ancestor of the language Sawa. And in Proto-Sawa, there was the word kule. And kule meant to spill out, to pour, to bleed from, any sort of meaning like that. Something to do with liquid coming out of a source, in sort of a bleeding manner where it comes out, in a stream. And with intransitive verbs in this language, if you repeat the word, so if you reduplicate it, then you get an object that does that thing. So kule kule means the thing that spills out, or that pours out, or that bleeds out. And through association, this word kule kule means passion fruit. Passion fruit, obviously, being a fruit that when you break into it, the insides really spill out. It looks disgusting, but passion fruit is very very nice. Kule kule is a word meaning passion fruit. Now, there are several sound changes that happened here from Proto-Sawa to Old Sawa. So something that happens is the E between the L and the K, so the kule, that E there, that is lost. So from kule kule, we get kul kule. Then finally, the L between the U and the E becomes a R. So from kule kule, we get kulkure, and then finally, the final E is lost. So we have kulkur, and kulkur just means passion fruit as well. So at this point, the Sawa people are encountered by the Akarim speakers. And because the climates of these where these two people come from are quite different, the Akarim had never seen a passion fruit before, and so decided to take the word kulkur as their word for passion fruit. Except in Akarim, there is no U vowel, a bit like Nawat, which I mentioned earlier, and also they don't allow consonant clusters, so they insert an epenthetic A between the L and the K. So from kulkur, we get kolakor. So the U has become an O, and then A is inserted between the L and the K. And this word, because it is taken directly from sawa and refers to a passion fruit, also means passion fruit. Now, Akarim, the Akarim people had a very large empire, and when the empire fractures, the various dialects of Akarim became new languages, very much like the Romance languages from Vulgar Latin. And so in Banach, one of these daughter languages, there are a couple of other changes. So the stress shifts, and so it means that a is now an unstressed vowel and becomes a schwa. And finally, the or, the final r is lost, making the final o long, so it raises to u. And then we get kolaku, and that's from kolakor. And then in Vonsa, which is another of these academic languages, I guess you could say, there is another change where the stress stays the same, and so o, the initial o is lost, and then the k becomes a ch between vowels, and then eventually just becomes h. So we get klahor. So from kolakor, we get kolaku and klahor. Now at this point, Old Sawa had also become Modern Sawa, and there were a couple of other changes here. So there was consonant cluster simplification, and I did this Italian style, where in a consonant cluster, the second sound in the cluster geminates. So, for example, in Latin, the word for sleep is somnus, where the second consonant in the cluster is na, and so in modern Italian, the word for sleep is sonno, I believe, where the mana just becomes na, or like octo in Latin becomes otto, where the kta just becomes a long ta. So instead of kulkur, we get kukur. And then finally, the ra at the end of a word becomes a ya. Now, I know that's a really weird sound change, but it has happened. I've seen it on Index Diachronica. I think it happens in Native American language, which creates the word kukui. And I can definitely see that final ui becoming a rounded u vowel. So yeah, certain dialects might say it something like cuckoo, cuckoo, and then maybe I don't know, there's like fronting harmony, and then the whole thing becomes cuckoo. But I'm getting ahead of myself there. That's sort of assuming what might happen in future sawa. So yeah, and this word kukui still means passion fruit. The word has always just meant passion fruit and sour. But from akarim into Banach and Vonsa, kolaku means any kind of fruit. Maybe these people have access to a lot of passion fruit. Maybe they migrated to a warmer climate, so passion fruit became the most common kind of fruit for them. And so this word kolaku then just came to mean any kind of fruit. Whereas the Klahor people, maybe for them the passion fruit was the most readily available sweet thing, and so Klahor then just refers to any kind of sweet thing. And maybe in the future, when sweets or candy becomes, a more common thing, when boiling sugar, whatever, that becomes a thing, maybe Klahor would become the word for, a sweets or candy. And Akarim also influenced another language, which is the language of Old Dranke, and these people took the word kolakor, basically as is, but then this word underwent certain sound changes. So the la became a ra, and the ka became a ga. So from kolakor, we get koragor, and that also just means passion fruit. But because these people, the Dranke people, live in quite a cold climate, the passion fruit was a very, very exotic item for them. So in modern Dranke, this word has become krogor, and just means any kind of exotic item. So in the four modern languages, we have kukui, or kuku, something like that, which from Sawa, which means passion fruit, kolaku, where it just means fruit, klahor, so sorry, kolaku being the Banach word, vonsa, klahor, any kind of sweet thing, dranke, any exotic item, just an exotic item. And so that all comes from this one word in Proto-Sawa, kule, which just comes from kule, to spill out. And this word meaning spill out eventually gives birth to another word meaning an exotic item. And that is the joy of etymology. And that is something you can really only get with historical conlanging. Now, in terms of my loan words, in Proto-Sawa, there was also the word ham, which meant to hunt something, and you could turn something into an agent by adding an a to it. So hama meant hunter, and then over time this just became a suffix am or ama, which means one who collects, harvests, or hunts the thing that it's attached to. So kukuyam was one who harvests passion fruits, but over time this was just reduced down to kukyam. So from kukui we get kukyam, which means one who harvests passion fruits. And so yes, that is the story of passion fruit and all the and yes, that's the Van de Voort Kule Kule. Or really, it starts with Kulkur when the Akarim have contact with Sawa for the first time. So yes.
Wow, I gotta say that's very impressive. Also that you use like a bunch of languages and not just like 2 or 3, but like a whole net of languages and a whole net of cultures. And I really like the world building there, especially the fact that you also adapted the word and did like semantic changes regarding the fact that they lived in a colder culture, colder climate, and stuff like that. So very cool.
And sorry. I just want to just the final thing on my thing. I know I talked for a while there, but sort of like the great thing about this experiment is that it's also this challenge is that it shows you how much world building you can do by just making one word. I essentially just made one word and said it means passion fruit. And then I've got loads of world building in there. I've said, the Akarim do a lot of trading and that they had a large empire and that they broke down into smaller empires. Some of the people migrated to warmer and colder climates and that affected how they saw the world. And, all these different things. And you can get that just from, saying, I want to make a word for a fruit. And then that makes you think about all these other things and, so yeah, it's a really good exercise is basically what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Yeah, that's actually also what I want to do with this task basically. So my word is originally from a language family that I call Yonzelic. Yonzelic isn't really a like the name, it's just like a working title because I always forget the actual name, and I'm not even sure if it's if there's even any real name for the language family. So we have like the native language of Yonzelo, which is the continent where the Cha people, the speakers of Kaentwo, migrated in a later time. So we're thinking about like 1,000 years ago. So their language was in contact with, of course, Yonzelic, and Yonzelic had the name Misat, meaning tummy. And then we have like a diminutive Hli, and Misatli means small belly or bladder. Also, I forgot the name again, but like the feeling when you need to pee. So that's basically the meaning of Misatli in Yonzelic. Before the Cha people speaking Kaentwo came, there was another population, the Enosh people. They had a very large empire, and they were in kind of good contact with the native Yonzelic people. So they adapted the word Misatli as the root m, s, sh. So kl became sh.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
Yeah, because they didn't have any kl, and the root became just m, s, sh, the consonants.
That's what I love the most, that you've sort of done like the Semitic triliteral root system there, and the way they've analysed that word is it's part of its own root within the original language. That's great. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah. So we then have a possible combination of vowels, namely e, a, e, yielding massesh, which is a plant that is causing you to pee. So that could be used for medical purposes. So, for example, if you're like ill or if you're sick, you might need to take this the medication or the plant to get out all toxins and such. So we have mathish, which is a plant that causes you to pee. And then after that there was like a series of wars with the Chap people, and I'm talking about a region that I've talked about before. It's the Plushen region, which is it's a region where they had a lot of contact to the Enosh people while they had the wars, and also some leftover population stayed after the rest of the Enosh people were expelled. So when they met the Enosh people, and they met or they came to have new plants in the new continent or on a new continent, they also came in contact with the Massage plant, and they analyzed it as Massish because there's a not so common but existent suffix ish, so Massish, and it's later reanalyzed as Massis because kaentwo has the following noun suffixes is, os, and as. So it's reanalyzed as is.
Mm-hmm.
And then the stem just becomes massi, and the s is just there for the nominative case.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the massis plant or the massis weed, and it's the same medication in this sense. And now we come to the last name. The last name is actually also a job. So we have the one who stamps or crushes or kind of makes the dried massis plant into a powder,
Mm-hmm.
used for like teas and medication. So we have massige. Keep in mind, massige is dialectal still because it hasn't yet become massis. And then we have the word dawati. Dawati meaning to crush, and dawati is daur, and then later doti or dauti are the possible regional dialectal variants of dawati. And then we have the agent suffix r, and we have masish daur or masish dor, and then it's slowly becoming mashdor. And so mashdor is a last name from the Plushen area, Plushen region, all around the capital and the heath, which is another important region there, and it's just someone who crushes the plant to create a tea that makes you pee. So that's my world building. Yeah.
Very good. So we went down. I mean, we both went sort of down the plant route.
Yeah.
What's the word? There's a specific word for it, isn't it? Like things that make you. What's the word again? Diuretic.
Yeah, diuretic. That was my world building exercise, and I hope you can also use this exercise to create a Wanderwort for your world. It's really great, as Harry mentioned. It's a great opportunity to go in depth with your world building. And so that's what we're going to do each episode, to just slowly get new ideas on how to work on your world.
I was just about to say, we don't really have a method for listeners to sort of write in currently, but maybe we should sort of set up an email address, and maybe people can, if people want to, they can write in about maybe whatever they want to say about the podcast, and also if they want to say if they've done your challenge for the month, they can say what they did as well.
You can also give us ideas that you want to see us talking about,
Yes,
either
yeah.
the main topic or like exercises, if you have any exercises, or if you're interested in any etymology, or us talking about any etymology that's interesting to you. I mean, I do have an email address for my kaentwo stuff. I could just maybe put it into the description of the episode on Spotify and YouTube. But yeah, I mean, maybe we can set up another email address, or you can probably also contact us on Instagram.
Yeah, I'm sure we can work something
Twitter.
out. But yeah, that's basically everything I had to talk about for this edition.
Yeah, me too. I gotta say, I'm really motivated to do more episodes, and I'm hoping that you're interested in more stuff of Harry and Kaentwo, or Harry and Jonah talking about conlangs and linguistics
Yeah, we've
and
got plenty of
such.
stuff that we want to talk about, especially in terms of main topic
Yeah,
stuff, and especially when I start doing a bit more conlanging again, I'll certainly have more to talk about in the update section.
yeah,
And
same.
also when I'm doing some research, I'm sure I'll be able to find some weird linguistic features to talk about. I probably won't talk as long as well because I talked for a lot about I talked for a long time. Maybe some of it might be cut out as well in terms of what I talked about for initial consonant mutation. But it is a system that I really love. Anyway, yes, that's everything for this edition of the Language Forgers, I believe. So it's yes, it's goodbye from me.
Yeah, goodbye. See you next time.